When we were considering whom to bring to introduce this important exhibit, Michael Berenbaum came immediately to mind. I'm very pleased to present Dr. Berenbaum.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be in Milwaukee to see so many old friends whom I've known for a very long time. It's a very special pleasure to be a guest of Lloyd and Sherry, and to see so many people that I've known throughout my work in the Jewish community. And just at my table is somebody I went to camp with, I think, maybe 5 decades ago. And Jane Abner, who worked with me putting the entry on Cleveland, and had I known that she could have done Milwaukee, I would have had Milwaukee, but I used Mel instead for Milwaukee. And also meeting Sue Selig, who's, I'm a baseball fanatic, and she is lucky that her last name is not Goodell, at least not today. I want to do 2 very different things this evening. I want to, first of all, say how deeply moved I am by the exhibition. And then I want to touch on a couple of themes of the exhibition that may change the way in which you see the exhibition, and may also change your perception of the range of things that are presented. And then I want to talk about what was lost in the Holocaust. The Holocaust is not about the murder of 6 million people. It's about the murder of one person 6 million times. The difference is one is about statistics, and the other is a human story. And the deeper we go into the human story, the more we understand the implications and the impact. I want you to notice when you go through the exhibition, the family tree. And I want each one of us to go home tonight feeling enormously grateful. 2 brothers. One comes to the United States, one remains in Europe. The family tree of one goes to Milwaukee, and he lives to see children and grandchildren. If the family tree continued, it would be grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And again, the family tree would not remain in Milwaukee, but it would go all over the world. I met one descendant who was in Prague last week, and again they go Karen, who's going all around the world. And I want all of us to feel enormously grateful for the decision that many of our courageous ancestors made to journey to the unknown. And if you don't feel gratitude for being in America and being able, for those of us whose families came here anywhere from 1820 to 1924, for being an American and coming here when America welcomed people because it needed people, it wanted people. And we had people who were courageous enough to dare the unknown. So first thing is gratitude to America. And the second thing is to notice, again, the family tree. There's a 1-word story that's told. It's called the Kinder Transport. Now, I've been giving deep thought to the Kinder Transport because there was a marvelous movie called Into the Arms of Strangers that was the story of the Kinder Transport, and I just spent this morning on the airplane writing a letter because it's recommended to the Library of Congress for preservation as an American treasure. But I want you to understand, and I wrote, when you see the Kindertransport, you experience not only history, but you experience the shattering experience as a parent and as a child that you used to be, and as a parent that you may be privileged to be. Kindertransport was a group of 10,000 children. 10,000 children from Germany, Austria, and by 1939 it was Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia, whose parents came to this incredible conclusion. They came to the most impossible, imaginable conclusion. They came to the conclusion that they couldn't protect their children. And that the greatest act of love that they could do for their children was to send them away to a strange land, a strange language, into the arms of strangers. The two Europeans who survived the family tree were two young children who were sent away to England because their parents intuited what the storm was going to be like, and imagine the decision you make that you can't protect your children, and you have to send them away. Now, the America, we had the opportunity when England received 10,000 people. Robert Wagner Jr. and Representative Rogers wanted to receive 20,000 children. England receives 10, we receive 20. The proposal never got out of the Congressional Committee because those children could grow up and they would take American jobs. Our borders were closed, England's were open. So our pride in America becomes problematic as we see the closing of borders. You'd say Kindertransport, okay, it's a wonderful story, the kids went there, but let me tell you what you learn when you follow this narrative of children. Not every child was well treated. Many children were taken advantage of. Most children never saw their parents again. There came a moment in 1942, and I want you to look at the family tree with that year in mind. There came a moment in 1942 when they sent a letter to their parents the way a child corresponds with their parents, and they got back the note addressee unknown. Why? Let me give you a story of the Holocaust that we call truth, lies, and statistics. And sometimes statistics take the deep truth. January 20th, 1942, the Germans met, 15 men met, and I'm being gender specific. 8 of them had doctorates. They met to coordinate the program for the murder of the Jews. They'd been killing Jews for 6 months, killing them in mobile killing units. And they decided that they couldn't do that with the vast Polish population. So they did something at that point which had already been done, which is they changed the metaphor. I'm not talking about language, I'm talking about structures. If you can't send mobile killers to stationary victims, what's the next thing you do? You reverse the process and you make the victims mobile and you send them to stationary killing centers. When they met on January 20th, 1942, 4 out of 5 Jews who were to be killed in the Holocaust were still alive. 15 months later, 4 out of 5 Jews were already dead. which means that if you look at the word 1942, you have to read that and see that an entire universe is being destroyed as these kids are in England. The lucky ones had their parents come back. Happy ending. Not a happy ending. When they left their parents, they were 8, 9, and 10 years old. When they met their parents again, they were 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and they had been hardened by life. Their parents knew how to relate to little children. They didn't know how to relate to independent young adults. It was never quite the same again. And the parents who came to see them, who had once been part of an affluent, cultured community, this is Germany, this is Austria, this is Czechoslovakia, middle-class bourgeois lives of the type that we're privileged to see, their parents who came back had also been changed by the events of 6 years. They were not the same either. One group of these people, ironically, of these Kindertransport, one group became drafted into the army. They were called, at the beginning, enemy aliens. And then all of a sudden America discovered, and Britain discovered at the same time, that they spoke language natively. They had all their antenna about German culture. They recruited them, they trained them in a camp in the United States called Camp Ritchie. They became the Ritchie Boys. And they were sent in to lead the occupation, to serve in advanced intelligence, and even to lead the interrogation. You all may have heard Inglorious Bastards about this group that went back. The real story is more interesting. We know Hitler was not assassinated, he didn't go to Paris again after 1940, but the real story was that these were the men who led the interrogation, who led the occupation. Henry Kissinger is one. Henry Kissinger, very cute story. Henry Kissinger is doing, and think of this, he's doing KP duty, cleaning a toilet with a toothbrush. Think of Henry Kissinger cleaning a toilet with a toothbrush and have a little bit of a smile come to your face. When a general comes in and says, who the blank, I'm not going to use the word, can read a goddamn map. This private gets off and nobody in the staff speaks German, the private gets off the floor and says, I can read the map, 3 guns are pointed at him immediately. They think he's a spy. By the way, he didn't have a German accent then. Not the same type he had later. He explains the map, he gives the commentary. General says, how long are you on KP duty? 2 weeks. When this KP duty is over, go to your commanding officer and he'll know what to do with you. He joined the general staff as one of the intelligence operatives. One cute story, and he later became a mayor of a small German city. One cute story is that a man who led the interrogation was complimented by a German general. The German general said, where did you learn your German? It's wonderful. He said, well, I have a PhD from Heidelberg. But I learned my interrogation techniques at Dachau. The general lost control of his bowels. You can imagine sometimes the fear is greater than even the torture. The anticipation is worse than the whole thing. The Kindertransport becomes, again, one measure. Now let's take a look at why Paul sent the drawings. 1924, America closed its gates. The immigrant discussion we have today is an old immigrant discussion. And remember, 1924 is way before the Depression, 5 years before the market crash. The immigrant discussion that we have today is a long one in American history. They were afraid that America would not be built on the stock the racial stock of its founders. So they went and they created a quota system based on the census of 1890. This is in 1924. Why 1890? Because it reverses all of the immigration that had come from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, meaning the Italians, the Greeks, the Russians, the Poles, and they gave great privilege to the people of the North who were more kindred racially to the American people. So just as the gates were closed, the gates which were the rescue for our families from pogroms and persecutions, America is closed. And Dorothy Thompson said, the difference between life and death is a stamp in a passport. That's it. Now, what do the dresses represent? The dresses represent, number one, a portable profession that's not dependent on language. Paul was a banker. Paul's skill was in relating in language and also dealing with figures. But he's essentially saying, my wife, who's a dressmaker, has a portable profession. Think of portable professions. You know what portable professions include? Portable professions include plumbers and electricians. Not lawyers, not writers, though we found if you go out to Hollywood, you'd find something interesting, that film and music were portable professions, as were architecture. And nurses are a portable profession, but not doctors who need much different licenses. I have my daughter's sister-in-law, Phi Beta Kappa graduate from Berkeley, was pre-med, and her parents sat her down and said, before you go to medical school, you have to become a nurse. She said, what do you mean I have to become a nurse? I'm admitted to medical school. She was admitted to Harvard Medical School. She said, how can I write to them that I'm going to nursing school? And they said, for 2 generations, our family has been saved by having a portable profession. And though we believe in America, you are going to get a portable profession. So she's probably the only one to defer Harvard Medical School to go to nursing school. Portable profession. What is a portable profession? The portable profession is being able to sew a garment. And think of all of the stories that you know in family lore of Jews who got jobs in the garment industry, of the tailors, of the Schneiders, all of whom had the capacity to reconstitute themselves. We required 2 things. We required what was called an LPC document, likely to become public charge, meaning that you had to fill a document out which said that you could make a living. In those days, if somebody had $50,000, a consul could turn them down because they might go, and $50,000 would be the equivalent of about $4 or $5 million today. But someday they might run out of money if they never made money again. Likely to become a public charge became the way in which the consulates of America erected paper walls. You needed a certificate of good conduct, which in Germany had to be issued by the Gestapo. And that again was part of the paper world. So we see simple requests which mask a desperation, which show you life and death, and go through that family tree. Death, Warsaw Ghetto. Death, Treblinka. 900,000 Jews came to Treblinka, less than 100 survived. And Treblinka was opened from the 23rd of July, 1942 to the 2nd of August, 1943. You do the math. And the only thing, by the way, if I had to change it, I wouldn't say death in Treblinka. Death is too neat. They died in Treblinka, but in Treblinka they were murdered. Okay. We can go through the exhibition almost panel by panel, and you see an instantiation of the Holocaust. And I want you to feel that desperation. I want you to feel your own sense of privilege. I want you to feel also the impossibility in the United States of grasping how much is being asked of you and how much you had to rise to the occasion without knowing what really was being asked. Talmud has a wonderful phrase. This is part 2. It says, if only the nations of the world had understood how much they lost when the temple was destroyed, they would have mourned the destruction of the temple more than the Jews. I want to suggest that as a text for us tonight. If only the world understood what was lost in the Holocaust, they would mourn what happened in the Holocaust more than the Jews. Let me paint a picture for you lightly. There's a man by the name of David Weiss Halivni. David Weiss Halivni was a classmate of Elie Wiesel's in Siget. He was what they call in Hebrew an Ilui. People used to come from all over the region to hear him at the age of 13 and 14 recite pages and pages of the Talmud by heart. They even did pin tests with him. You put a pin in one page and you looked where the word appeared 6 or 8 or 10 pages later, and you asked him what happened and he'd recite it for you. He had has a photographic memory. And to give you an example of the reverence with which he's held by people in the field, a friend of mine was giving a paper, and David Weiss was in the room, and he raised his hand to ask a question. And Weiss casually went through about 35 sources and 4 or 5 manuscripts. And my friend is sitting there not asking to get the question, writing down the sources, because he knew what would take him 5 years to find out. Weiss Halivni was a classmate of Wiesel's, and he tells the following, and he then became a university professor at Columbia, one of only 5 people who had that status, meaning that theoretically he could teach anything he wanted at the university. He won the Israel Prize as an American, which is the equivalent of the State Prize, the Nobel Prize that Israel gives. And he says a very simple thing. He says, you know, Wiesel and I weren't the smartest in our class. And he hasn't done badly either. Meaning, these were two, Wiesel was 15 when he went to Auschwitz. These were 2 of the kids from Siget, a small Hungarian town, that all of a sudden we don't know what it might have produced. Because we don't know who these people could have been, what they might have been. Let's give an interesting second image. All of you know Ellis Island. Probably half of us or 3/4 of us could trace our roots to Ellis Island because we're in the northern sphere. If we were in the south or the west, we'd have to say that some of you would trace your roots to Galveston, Texas. But we didn't get to Galveston, Texas. We came the old-fashioned way. A couple of you went to Boston, you became Yankees, and you know. Ellis Island honored descendants of 100 communities, 100 countries that came to the United States as immigrants. Of the 107 were Holocaust survivors. the most distinguished people in the various countries that came to the United States, without paying attention to it, 7 of them were Holocaust survivors. Let's take an example of a country that most of you could not even point to on the map. Macedonia. Now, the only thing most of you know about Macedonia is you may remember Philip of Macedon, who was the father of what? Of Alexander the Great. Macedonia is not even called Macedonia, it is called the former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia. The most distinguished American to survive Macedonia was a fellow by the name of Itzhak Adizes. Itzhak Adizes is the world's foremost authority on management. Replaced, as it were, Peter Drucker in the theory of management. Let's look at the story. He was the son of a man who could not read. Turns out that now he understands because of his own son. He understands that his father had learning disabilities and was probably dyslexic, which they couldn't diagnose and treat then. Adizes' father escaped, first being saved by a Christian priest, and then being saved by a Muslim community in Albania. And Albania has a crazy statistic. If you want to win a trivia contest, ask what is the only country in Europe that had more Jews at the end of World War II than it did at the beginning? And the answer is Albania. Didn't have that many at the end, didn't have that many at the beginning. And his father survived by pretending to be a Muslim, and because he had been a medic in World War I, pretending to be a doctor in a town that had no medical facilities. Everybody knew that he was Jewish, and everybody knew he wasn't the doctor, but he was as good as they got. His son goes from, they come back to Macedonia, they can't go back to Macedonia as there's nothing there. Their home is destroyed, their community is empty, nothing's there. They go to Belgrade, which is then in Yugoslavia. They start rebuilding their life there, and they get permission to immigrate to Israel. They immigrate to Israel, they then immigrate to the United States. And he does his PhD in management on the management of Yugoslavia, which was neither quite communist nor socialist nor capitalist, but had a collective style of management, and came out with the types of management things that were the equivalent of, well, we'll put it to you very simply. You know where Michael Bloomberg sat in his corporation? He sat in the center of the floor. He couldn't understand how the mayor of New York, when he became mayor, the mayor of New York sits in a luxurious office and has to wait for 3-4 hours to meet with people on his staff, when he ran Bloomberg, he could sit in the middle of the floor and have a staff meeting by yelling to 3 or 4 people they could come together. This is the style of collective management, not hierarchical management, that he developed, becomes the outstanding citizen to contribute to the United States. From what? From Macedonia. The story replicates again and again and again. Man who invented the portable computer, a child survivor of the Holocaust. Head of Intel, child survivor of the Holocaust. Every sphere of human knowledge, every sphere of human creativity, science and music and art and literature, all of these became people who survived. And then imagine that the survivors who survived were only a small percentage, especially among children, a small percentage of the young people who were killed. You read statistics of Theresienstadt. One statistic of Theresienstadt, 15,000 children under the age of 16 entered Theresienstadt, less than 100 left. So the child survivors that we're talking about are few. And the pool of humanity that was lost in the Holocaust is mighty, incredible. Let's touch a second element of this. We Jews have not recovered demographically from the Holocaust. There were 18 million Jews in the world in 1933. There are 14 million Jews in the world today. We not only lost a generation, we lost generations of generations and all of the talent that would have spurred. All of the creativity, all of the genius. By the way, all of the problems also. But imagine 70 years later, and we as a people, despite massive accomplishments in the United States and Israel, we haven't even returned to the numbers before the Holocaust. Something absolutely astounding. Let's look, there's a new book that's going to come out called God and Identity from the Ashes. It is a series of short essays by second and third generation children of survivors. Not children's survivors, but children of survivors. You scratch your head and you start reading. Canada, 3 justices of the Supreme Court, children of survivors. Few people survived. Head of the IDF in Israel, head of the Shin Bet in Israel, head of the Mossad in Israel. People who have the highest level of security and responsibility for the future of the state of Israel. Who are they? They are the descendants of people whom people pejoratively refer to as sabonnikim, as soap, as if soap was made of these Jews. And as also people who went like sheep to the slaughter. Look what their descendants did and look what might have happened had that been. Let's talk about Israel for a second. People mistakenly say Israel is an answer to the Holocaust. In one sense, Israel can't be an answer to the Holocaust. Let me tell you why, and in 30 seconds you'll all agree with me. If you asked any Jewish leader in 1933, in 15 years you can have a Jewish state, but this is the price you'll have to pay for it, we would never want to meet the leader who would have said, okay, I'm willing to pay that price. Nobody would have been willing to pay that price. And think of the numbers of people who would have imagined Israel as their future. Had what? Had they been able to survive and thrive, Israel would have been created not out of desperation, but out of opportunity. And would have been created not as an object of repair, but as an object of building, not rebuilding. In the United States, great architects who ends up building the memorial in Berlin. The memorial in Berlin is created by Daniel Libeskind. Jewish Museum in Berlin creates a brilliant building. Terrible building for a museum, but a brilliant building beyond imagination. And what he learns from the Holocaust, he then uses to help America struggle to confront what happened at 9/11, and he wins the competition for the 9/11 building. In music, in art, in cartoons, in cartoons. All of this skill, all of this genius is brought to bear, and these were the few who survived versus the multitude who did not survive. I am not an intellectual historian of the sciences. What I know about science can fill a thimble with some room for other things within the thimble. But if you look at the number of survivors of the Holocaust who have won Nobel Prizes, you see again the genius of the talent that has been lost. We see the designs by Hetty. And there's a woman in Los Angeles who built a brilliant design studio in Los Angeles. Her name is Renee Firestone. She gave it up about 20 years ago to devote her time to teaching at the Simon Wiesenthal Center and at the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, the group that Spielberg did. Her life was saved by drawings. She was in Auschwitz. And to give you an idea, when she was deported to Auschwitz, her father had once bought her a beautiful swimsuit from a trip of his abroad. She's going on the train for deportation, and she said, I want to take the swimsuit with me. Can't take the swimsuit with me, in my luggage. I'm not going to have any luggage. She put it on her. She arrives in Auschwitz with a swimsuit. In Auschwitz, one day, she is sketching. Her German supervisor, a woman, sees her sketch, and she says, "Who did this?" And none of the young women, we could almost call them girls at that point, are willing to step forward. Finally, she says, "The person who did this doesn't step forward, I'm going to kill all of you." She stepped forward, she said, "I did this." The woman says to her, "Can you make this?" She says to herself, "I sure as hell can draw it, I don't know if I can make it." She wasn't a tailor, she wasn't a seamstress, she was a designer, she sketched. So she said, "Well, I better say I can make it. And I better learn by the end that I can make it." So what she does is she drags out the process of making it. She was a Hungarian Jew who arrived only in 44, and she dragged it out for a couple of months until the Russians came, and she said they came a couple of days before she probably would have gotten killed because she couldn't make it. She saved that, and that was one of the sketches she used to get a job in Los Angeles when she came out 9 years later as a designer, and then had a design shop that did very, very well in Los Angeles. And you then say to yourself, what would have happened had she come over to Milwaukee? And had she been able to realize these creations, which for her were an SOS, a plea for life, a sense of maybe on this I can build my future, which were not listened to. Renee Firestone had it in which they were listened to. I want to come back and say 3 more very brief things. Number 1, the Holocaust is about people. 6 million dead, at least 6 million stories. And I know from the testimony we gathered of survivors that there are stories within stories within stories within stories. It's one of the reasons that you have it as used in movies. It's one of the reasons you have it used as the backdrop, because they're ultimate stories. They're stories about the struggle between life and death. Second point is we are still paying the penalty for what was lost. if we think of what's been contributed by those few who survived, to us, to all of humanity, we can only imagine what would have been contributed had this event not taken place. And the third is that we have increasingly come to need the Holocaust because we live in a world in which people are not sure what's good, what's not bad. We live in a world of deep and profound relativism. And the easiest thing we can say about the Holocaust in one sense is, if this is not evil, then there is no such thing as evil. If this is not bad, there's no such thing as bad. And that's one of the reasons why people reach for the Holocaust whenever they try to scream and to shout about the events and the catastrophes in our world. What have we done? And let me tell you what we've done in Jewish and biblical terms. And let me tell you that we failed at it, but we've succeeded at it in a certain way. The Bible takes us into the experience of Egypt and tells a particular story that through Jewish history has been made the universal story of freedom. Everybody in the world knows that there is such a thing as Pharaoh, and such a thing as Moses, and such a thing as the journey through the desert and the quest for the promised land. If you want something for your seders, ask people to think at their seders, what is your Pharaoh? Who is your Pharaoh? Who is your Moses? What is the journey you must take? And what is your dream of the promised land? That's how universal a story it is. We see our own story as a paradigm. Why do we tell that story? We don't tell the story to speak about suffering. We tell the story to speak about morality and responsibility. No other reason is given in the Bible for remembering the Exodus, remembering that we were slaves in the land of Egypt. It is used as the deepest moral justification we have to enlarge our dimension of conscience and to deepen our sense of responsibility. What we are trying to do with the Holocaust is to tell that story, not to cry and to shout and to scream at our anguish, but because we believe that human beings have to be more moral, more responsible, more deeply engaged in this world. And last point, if we're not ashamed of the world we're living in, and the President is speaking tonight, if we're not ashamed of the world we're living in, including the anti-Semitism, but not only including the anti-Semitism, the hatred, then we haven't learned anything about our past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. We talked about who would be appropriate to bring to Milwaukee to kick off our Janad exhibit, and only one person came to mind, and that's you, Michael. And we thank you for coming to Milwaukee, taking time out of your schedule. I want to tell you all that Michael has agreed to talk about evil tomorrow at 10:30 here in the museum. And if you haven't made a reservation, please do. Parking will be an issue for you because of the tent taking our parking lot. And but you can carpool. Many of you have made reservations to come in here. Michael, have another chance because it's a treat. How often do we get such a well-versed, my goodness, person here? Michael's also going to be at Marquette University having a conversation with Mike Boucher tomorrow at 4:30 at Eckstein Hall, I think it's called. Yeah, the law school. So you could also hear him yet one more time. Michael said to me, when I come to a community, I come to work. And we thank you for working so hard to help us be a better community. I want to thank Marianne Lubar. Many of you know that Marianne and I have worked together since 1997, 98. And when Marianne stepped down as president, you know, she stayed on the board, so on and so forth. When we finally got to the point where we felt we were capable of creating this exhibit, which was a very simple, complicated, difficult exhibit, it really is. I could think of one person, and I asked Marianne if she would share this. And because of her fabulous taste, she is wonderful, knows many people, as she mentioned, people from the Art Museum, and they came to help us. And I thank you, Marianne, for taking on this job. By the way, I want to tell you something. Many of you complimented us on the big streetscapes that you saw in the exhibit. It was her idea. I want to thank Hannah Rosenthal and the staff of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. You know, people gave up their parking places. I mean, we've enlisted the whole Federation to help us bring this forth tonight. I thank the Milwaukee Rep and their staff. I don't know if Mark Clement made it or not. David Russick has been thanked, but I thank him. I give him a big hug and a kiss because he helped us get on the right track. I thank the volunteers, the wonderful docents. I want to thank my staff. My God. They work their little cushions off every minute of every day, and I always get the credit. They do all the work, believe me. Tomorrow I told you about, there are membership envelopes on your table. Many of you are members, some of you aren't. I think you have to agree what we're doing in this museum is really special. It enhances this community, the Jewish community and the general community. Our fees are modest. Please become a member. Thank you. The 7:30 tour will meet up immediately after I finish speaking, which is now. So I think there's still food. For goodness sakes, eat. You paid for it. Enjoy, and thank you for coming.